perfect. Hi, folks. I'm Andy Wang. I'm with DuoFun's Studios. Today, we're going to be here to talk about mid-market monetization, or what I call the median spenders. My background's in a combination of high tech, as well as I was also a first-generation esports player. And I run two mid-core mobile user groups. I don't know of the largest. They're certainly very sizable. One is what we call a whale group. You have to spend $2,000 in a game before to join, so that's not very relevant to mid-market monetization. But the other one is a generic mobile user group. You know, we usually go from game to game and all the mainstream games, and we see most of us fill up all the top guilds in these kind of RPGs that we go to. We run a lot of surveys in these mobile user groups where we ask them, how much did you spend on this game? When did you make that purchase? And things like that. So it's some of the data that we talk about and we use to formulate some of our hypotheses that we have on mid-market monetization comes from the trends that we observe in these groups in the last 2 or 3 years. So a little bit about DuoFun. We were founded January 2016. We're based in Irvine, California. We started here in San Francisco, but San Francisco is too expensive, so we decided to move down to Irvine. About half our guys came from Blizzard, so that made more sense for us to move down to Irvine. We make real-time, team-based multiplayer games. So we want people to play with friends. We want people to play against other people. But most importantly, we want them to play in a team-based fashion where you win together, where you lose together. Everybody on our game side has worked on a commercially successful game before. We identified a couple different areas that we think is lacking in the team-based real-time area. And we put a lot of emphasis on building up our technology. So we have this thing we call RIBS. It's our real-time or reusable integrated backend service server that we use from one game to another. We have one game that's been product ready. We have another one that's been pre-production. And we've been testing out some of our hypotheses on mid-market gaming from there. So why do we even want to focus on the median spenders in the first place? Well, one more thing is just a quick shout out to some of our great advisors that we have. These are our early investors as well as people that gives us a lot of feedback on where to go. They cover all ranges from the super big down to just indie gaming. And without them, we would be a lot more scattered than we already are. So why do we even want to target mid-market? Well, we looked at early on, at least in the previous games that all of our guys worked on, it's always a hunt for whales. It's always trying to get those big spenders. And that's always going to be part of the strategy. But when we start looking at that, we see, well, everybody else wants the whales. Everybody else wants that big spender too. And it's no secret. It's an obvious truth that user acquisition keeps going up more. And when we look at sustainability of a game, we wanted to make sure we outpace that race and we're not at risk to higher and higher user acquisition cost. Well, but the starting point is you do want the big spenders. And as more and more people want the big spenders, what happens is what we usually see in gaming, we see two paths. We see, well, you can be very niche, so you can be a dating sim, you can be something like that, and you can get wells that way. But the more mainstream way is you're forced to win with higher production value and a larger feature cost. So longer development cycles, more perfect development cycles in order to actually win that, because you're going to be sinking a lot of money in. In any kind of creative products or tech products, the higher your cost gets, the less risk you can take. So once your budget has more and more zeros in that sum, you start needing to stick with proven things, traditional gameplay, things that worked in another blockbuster game. And when you do more and more of that, you become just a game that's very similar to other titles that are out there, thematically, spiritually, what have you. And now you're part of the problem because your only path to ROI is really through the whales that like the traditional games. And this brings you back to the loop that now you spent all this time building a game, high production value, which means very costly to build, and now you got to go after those wells, and you become part of that reason why the cost goes higher and higher and higher. Well, that's bad. That's the rat race that we didn't want to fight in. So we wanted to be able to avoid higher and higher UA costs. We wanted to run our development cycles at a shorter clip compared to having to build a long time. And most importantly for us, because we are all gamers, we wanted to make sure we started making different kind of games that weren't just one clone after another. So there's two hypotheses that we tested with the chief puzzle officer. First thing that we wanted to test was, would you spend $20? Well, this is more market data, but would you spend $20 if you knew people were spending $2,000? The reason we wanted to test this hypothesis was because I think a year and a half or 2 years ago, a Monster Strike was the first time. We had 300 people in our user group that filled out the survey, and we saw a good, healthy chunk of what we call median spenders, $20 to $60 or so. And from then on, from one game after another, Unison League, Valkyrie Connect, Logrus recently, we started seeing a very binary distribution. There was zero and proud, no problem with being free to play, willing to grind the time, and then it was either drop $200, $300 the first day or none at all. And the reason we started seeing this disparity, our hypothesis when we talk in our user monthly meetups, was we got a lot of people say, why would I spend $20 if I know that there's people dropping $1,000, $2,000? I used to support the developers, but people say that. But support the developers is intrinsically rooted only if they get an advantage and an outcome. And you still want to support the developers only if you're getting something. So, and apparently that getting something is a far, far bigger component than supporting the developers. That's just the truth out there. So what we had our people say during our meetups was, well, guys, I would love to play with you, but I won't spend $20 because that just makes me like the fattest sucker, to the guy who spent like $1,000 or $2,000. So we saw a sharp decrease we didn't necessarily see an increase in the number of people that spent more than $200 on the first day, but we did see a sharp decrease in the people that were in the middle. And it's just a value equation. So on the other hand, we asked, well, would you spend $20 if the maximum spend was $20. At that point, you're a premium game. That's just how much exactly that your game costs. Well, that's not very good either because premium games has their spend capped, and that's not exactly what we want to try to do here. So where is that magic number? $60, $200. Now, we know what the users say, but the other thing is that what they say and what they do is also very different. So we did 7 different cohorts of user acquisition during the soft launch of Chief Puzzle Officer, where we essentially tested the effective cap through masking it in the back end, in terms of the different leveling curves, different progression curves at the time. When we raised the level cap, the amount of experience needed to raise cards and things of that nature, we tweaked that each one so that more savvy players can see what the value they were getting for their $20. And we started seeing that. Can't get deep into details in this in a 20-minute session, but what we started to see was that there's definitely a correlation. There was a correlation between what people felt was the value that they were going to get from the money. Now, so we know extreme examples. We know on one end, if this is what we call the Clash Royale. If you know that there were the $2,000 spenders, the $1,000 spenders, you're very de-incentivized to be able to spend pockets of $20 or $40. It really doesn't matter if what worked like a year ago was, if you give them these monthly packs that seem so good that you can't pass up. That worked really well at the time. But now I think gamers are getting a lot more sophisticated where they're weighing that versus, well, what exactly am I getting? So what if I'm getting and you see this in war simulations a lot. So what if I'm getting a beginner pack that has a 7,000% value that cost me $4.99 if the real outcome is that it didn't make any material difference between me versus the guys who are spending much more. So we know that at the extreme end, we are losing the median spenders. Now, we also know on the other end, if we go the premium game route, then the amount of people that spend and buy the game is exactly the people that spent the cap. We have that, but we already know that that isn't the true earnings potential of our game. So trying to accumulate enough data, trying to experiment, we don't have the perfect answer, but finding that midpoint, inflection point in the middle is where we think as a studio going forward that we can find where we can find the healthy medium spenders that will get us into a healthy mid-market tier. Mid-market, if you look at economics, if you don't look at gaming and just look at mid-market democratization. Mid-market as a segment would be the 4th largest GDP country in the world. So you could, the dream of finding enough guys to spend medium amounts in your game economically is always there, but certainly doesn't work if you're going for a value-based spend in the current free-to-play paradigm. And that's what we're trying to tackle. The call to action to get people to spend, even if you have an effective cap in your game on how you spend, isn't really any different than traditional means. You still want to give them incentives. People still need the psychological drivers to spend. So in our game, we still give you the welcome pack. It's just that we still, despite just saying things like trashing on military sims, giving you 7,000% value, we still do that in our game. We still give you the deal that you can't say no. We still do the intermittent timed random specials that come at you and go away after a limited time. All we do is we make it very apparent in the game. We try to help players calculate the cost of what they're going to get, and we try to make it much more apparent that this $2.99 is a lot more. It gets you, 1/3 of the way to your level cap. That's not the actual numbers, but the idea is to give the users enough info that they know what they're getting with this $2.99. No longer are we just doing $2.99, so cheap, buy it now. It's $2.99. This has a direct value of X. So now we're trying in our latest cohorts, we try to put that messaging inside of our welcome packs. I mean, we tried a few different things I don't have listed here. We have things like enough to max level 3 cards. We have things like get to max level 48 hours faster or something like that. We're trying to spell out the results to the users so that they know. And we are tinkering right now with if we should or should not actually put an effective cap spend. Some games in Japan are doing this where they actually cap the monthly spend that you can have in the game. We focus on the North American market, so we're more iffy about doing that. We still want to have the traditional big spenders, but we also, at the same time, we're trying to figure out where that happy medium balance is. So because we are a real-time because our studio focuses on real-time multiplayer games, we still use competition, collaboration, engagement to drive. We still do things like putting in your guild chat when someone draws a 5-star card. We still have things people are building together. And so we still want to drive, but what we're trying to do and we're hoping to achieve is if we can get a lot of $20 to $60 reoccurring spenders, we would be a lot happier to do that. Because in our own UA that we do, not having to do Facebook targeting for guys with the latest iPhone 7, having spent the money in a game in the last 14 days, likes the page of Game of War or something like that, not having to do that and be able to use alternative targeting, and by now having a pretty substantial list to just do lookalike targeting. Those kind of guys cost us a lot less to buy, and if we can get them to spend a lot less cost, means that we can be satisfied with a lot less LTV. So that's what I think I'm also signed up to do the talking in a couple months at Pocket Gamer in Europe, and maybe at that point I'll tell you it's a completely failed social experiment. But for now, we are approaching that because we think as a new studio, we don't have the backing to be able to play in that big UA spend market, so we got to find a different way. We may very well, with our game chief puzzle officer, now that we collected the data we want, we may very well partner together with a publisher, and if they're one of the ones that think they have a competitive advantage in the big spending game, sure. But as a new studio, so far operating on a solo path, and who knows who we might partner up with on the publishing side for this game or our next one, we're trying to figure out a new way to survive, and that's why we came up with this whole idea to target mid-market. Okay. Now, does it work? That's what we care about. That's what you probably care about. So in the first cohorts that we've had a lot of actual users and folks on a different, some other gaming website that we won't talk about here, for the longest time, we can see that once we make our reputation out there as a game that, yes, you spend. Yes, you absolutely spend, but it is not a whale-dominant game. We can see that our retention and our engagement has been, compared to traditional games of success, much, much higher. We're doing very good on our day 1, day 7, day 30, as well as our engagement rate, how long people play our games. We stayed, for a number of different sites that have ranking charts, we stayed up there for quite a while, despite just being in soft launch status through multiple iterations that we have. So we're cautiously optimistic in the direction that we're going in, but at the end of the day, I cannot at this point tell you that this has translated into a profitable real dollar proposition for us. It could. We haven't hit critical threshold into where we think where a normal well-based paying game would have hit anyway, so I think we're on the trajectory, but as I always tell my team, it doesn't count until it actually happens. So we are moving in that trajectory, and I hope in 2-3 months to be able to report at the next Pocket Gamer conference that we have crossed the chasm into profitability. All right? Any questions?
Yes, good question. Let me ask one.
Because I'm a massive fan of this kind of model, because of what you seem to me to be doing is broadening your funnel, essentially. I mean, rather than focusing on the same targets that everybody else is, it seems to me that you're focusing on trying to engender the values. But what's in the back of my mind is surely what you also will end up doing, again, we don't know the data yet, but do you suspect that by getting this mid-market engaged more deeply, that they may themselves become larger spenders than you would have otherwise expected?
Yeah,
Sorry?
Yeah, absolutely. Now,
do you have any kind of insight that kind of shows that might be possible yet, or is it too early?
See, what we've seen right now is when I look at my whale user group, the number, it used to be if the game is fun, then we drop money right away to get that early edge. But now the most criteria is this game going to be around a month? Is this game going to be around in 3 months? Is the population going to die out? I think what we like to say is that whales have been burned a lot with their short-term spending habits. So it may sound kind of shady to say this, but we went after mid-market gaming as a means to a healthier ecosystem, so that whales who are now, whales don't mind not playing your day on day one. They don't care. They catch up right away, when they want to come. And as you said, as you alluded to, the chances of people making repeat purchases are so high that if we can target people willing to make the spend between $20 to $60, then as we start moving into things that are not more power related, cosmetics, different type of things. We being based in Irvine, close to LA, we have a lot of talks with sports figures where we talk about different intrinsic prizes, like spend a day with certain NFL stars, things like that. And those are the things that we think we can get high spend without impacting the health of the ecosystem. But we've more or less targeted the healthiness and integrity of the player-based ecosystem as the #1 means to be able to achieve the whales.
And I think that's going to be something that affects lots of people. I'm trying not to use the term whale ever again. And today has not been helpful for that. That's just life. But I'm not a fan of the word whale, because I think whale is a very specific term that relates to a behavior we see in gambling. And I think the reason we see that behavior in gambling is because if you're a gambler, you know the gambling game that you already love.
Yep.
And we use that term in games at our risk because we are creating content that people don't necessarily already love.
Yep.
They have to learn to love, and there's a process and journey for them to get onto that. This is why I was focusing so much on this idea of, for me, it's not about mid-market necessarily, or whale, or true fan, as I prefer to say. It's about understanding the player journey, and not everybody is going to get to the final end stage where they're dropping thousands of dollars.
Right. So one thing I will share from our, we do use the word whale because that's the easiest way to categorize us. From our big spender user group, one thing was the first iteration of that back 3 years ago. I wish I can tell you back then it was only $1,000 to get in. It was that was lower spend days back then. I wish I can tell you everybody in that group were rich, disposable income, had lots of money. It's not the case. A lot of the membership in that group were what we call one-time whales, or regret whales. So after they spent, they greatly regret that they have spent in that money. Yeah. And it was a really, I think for a period of 3 months, our group was more focused on helping, get refunds from Apple and Google by explaining how this affected their lives and blah, 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 blah. Since we have strength in numbers, we actually got a lot of refunds in that by just basically writing in and spam. So what we talked to a lot of guys, and we were looking for, we ourselves and the people that we wanted to associate in that group were people that spend in entertainment, knowing that it is entertainment, happy to spend in their entertainment. Now, a lot of us have what we call hero complex, where when we play war simulations, we like to be able to help and lead and collaborate an entire alliance to victory. So and we don't view that as a sin. We don't view that as shameful. We just view that that's what we seek in our entertainment. And so when I look at it, I'm in my mind as a game maker, I'm making a separation between healthy big spending and unhealthy big spending, and we're trying to, at DuoFun, we're trying to make the games that gravitate towards the healthy big spending. So we don't try to do things with, let's say, gacha, or expansion packs we use those mechanisms, but we make sure that they're more modern day. They have fail safes. They have triggers where you'll have your mileage, guaranteed 5-star after a certain amount of pulls, so that people don't fall into what we call rage pull, which traditionally has been one of the highest drivers. We talked to a publisher a year ago that said, but Rage Poll is one of the main sources of income, to where it comes from. And what we say to that is that doesn't sound like a publisher that we're going to work together with, in terms of our games.
So I think the key thing, the message I'm getting is it's about healthy market building in your game, which is a perfect way to end. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cheers, Andy. Thank you.